Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russia have yielded expected results as 2 months after the bombardments, there are clear signs of the Russian retail fuel market weakening. Ukraine's drone offensive has disabled as much as 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity, triggering nationwide fuel shortages and price surges, according to Kyiv Post analysis. Ukraine's unmanned aircraft, Army Military Intelligence and Special Operations Forces, on August 2, kicked off a campaign using long-range drone strikes targeting mostly Russian oil refineries. Since then, Ukrainian kamikaze drone aircraft have launched at least 55 attacks against Russian fossil fuel processing infrastructure, with the longest strikes hitting facilities 1,500 to 1,700 kilometers away in Russia's Perm and Baskorsten oil-producing regions, according to Kyiv Post estimates. Ukraine's unmanned aircraft forces routinely attack more targets than Russian oil refineries. The biggest known Ukrainian attack with drones against Russia probably took place on August 2, when Russia's defense ministry claimed its forces shot down at least 332 encroaching aircraft in a night of air combat. The kamikaze robot planes themselves have been relatively modest in size, comparable to a light single-engine recreational aircraft and, often, much smaller, carrying no more than 200 kilograms of explosives and usually much less. In early September, after a month of Ukrainian attacks, traders and overseas analysts were estimating the Russian capacity to process crude oil into product had already fallen by 17 to 25%. A month later, the most common estimate was 38 to 40%. With 3/4 of Russia's entire oil processing capacity located within the 1,800 to 2,000 kilometer maximum range of Ukrainian long-range aircraft, the bottom line appears to be that after 2 months of strikes, Ukraine has managed to knock offline about every second Russian oil refinery it can hit, and with follow-up strikes kept it offline. Some refineries have been hit 3 times in the past 2 months. Equally important, politically for the Kremlin, is that retail prices for automobile fuel have shot up across Russia 20 to 30%, with spikes up to 40% reported in far-flung markets. In September, gasoline trading volumes fell by 5%, fuel sales by 1.4%, summer diesel by 11%, and prices increased by 5%. Total Russian gasoline and diesel fuel production fell by 6% in August, another 18% in September, and about 70% of that capacity loss was caused by Ukrainian drones blowing up pieces of the Russian energy production infrastructure. For average Russians, Ukraine strikes throughout much of the war have not been particularly visible because Russia's state-controlled media downplays these attacks. However, millions of Russian citizens either operating vehicles or needing them for transportation have directly experienced fuel shortages in the past 60 days, or sat in a car queue stretching kilometers, driven up with a near-empty tank to a close filling station or even drawn fuel rationing coupons. Russian regions without substantial economic and political clout have been the most affected. The worst-off Russia-controlled region is the occupied Ukrainian territory Crimea, where peninsula fuel stations ran out of product for more than a week in late September. Shortages first were reported in remote Russian territories like Buryatia, followed by Yakutia, Chukotka, Kuril and Ukraine's Luhansk region. As supplies have run low, spiking wholesale prices and fuel station shutdowns have rippled into Russia's central industrial heartland.
The Russian energy sector is in critical condition, facing a systematic failure and a capacity deficit that has already reached 25 gigawatts. This was stated by Lieutenant Andriy Kovalenko, head of the National Security and Defense Council's Center for Countering Disinformation, on his Telegram channel. Kovalenko notes that the current situation is not a random glitch, but a deep-seated problem that makes the Russian energy system extremely vulnerable, emphasizing the scale of the problem. Russia's energy sector today is a power keg. The capacity deficit is reaching 25 gigawatts. This isn't an isolated failure, but a systematic failure, and that doesn't even include the systematic blows that Russia itself is bringing forward with its actions against our energy sector, he noted. Instead of making the necessary investments in its own thermal power plants, Moscow is facing depleted reserves due to international sanctions and the physical aging of its equipment. Kovalenko noted that without Western components, modernization of the industry is virtually impossible, and the system is bursting at the seams, even without external attacks. Kovalenko harshly criticized the actions of the Russian leadership, pointing out the futility of attacks on the Ukrainian energy system, the restoration of which is supported by the West. Putin's actions to attack our energy sector, which the West is helping to restore, are nothing but utter idiocy, because it will be very difficult for Russians to restore the Russian energy sector once a symmetrical response is launched. So far, Belgorod has felt this. The consequences of the shortage are already being felt across the country. 42 Russian regions are forced to impose restrictions on electricity consumption during peak hours. Problems are being reported in central Russia, Siberia, and the Far East. The head of the Central Power Supply Center warned that the consequences could be significantly worse. The loss of refineries will still seem like a cakewalk for Russians. Amid a domestic crisis, Russia continues to finance the construction of nuclear power plants abroad, particularly in Africa, under the auspices of Rosatom, while its own cities find themselves on the brink of blackouts. Kovalenko concluded that the sanctions have already dealt an irreparable blow. The sanctions have already struck. There are no reserves. The infrastructure is deteriorating, and there is no exit plan. Meanwhile, Putin is attacking Ukraine and guaranteeing his population a cold and dark winter because no one will tolerate it. Protecting Moscow is Putin's primary plan right now, and to achieve this, he is prepared to sacrifice all regions. The head of the Center for Political Studies stated. Mikhail Gonchar, an expert on international energy relations and security and president of the Strategy 21 Center for Global Studies, believes that drones alone are not capable of causing large-scale blackouts in Russian cities. According to him, although the range of modern UAVs is constantly increasing, their capabilities are limited. They are not cruise or ballistic missiles. Drones' payloads are approximately 50 kilograms, which is enough to disable a transformer or damage equipment at an oil refinery, but not to destroy large energy facilities.